Welcome to Avant-Garde Entrepreneur. I am so glad you're here today with me, my friend. Today, we are talking about driving transformation in ourselves and our communities and being resilient amidst the challenges that inevitably come our way. In episode 67, we had a wonderful discussion with Mo Ahmed, who did a really great job of laying down these foundational aspects of building resilience and mental endurance in business and life. The interesting and frankly, sometimes painful thing about resilience is the only way to become resilient is to walk through the fire, to live through the challenges, to get to the point where your energy and your emotions have turned into wisdom. As a social entrepreneur, you have a colossal vision of impacting thousands and creating multi-generational change in the communities you serve. And you have this gargantuan task list. To create sustainable change amidst these generationally ingrained systemic issues takes an uncommon kind of grit and courage. And the same way of thinking, of doing and being that got you to the level which has served you well here to get you here will not get you to the next level. That innate desire that you have to transform communities will also require transformation within yourself. But what does transformation look like for you? Likely you have pushed every boundary that you already know, every boundary known to man, it seems. What new skills do you need to develop? What do you need to continue doing? What kind of mindset shift is required for you to be more prepared to walk through the fire? How do you drive transformation in your community when there's so many forces that encourage sameness? How do you cast a vision that people can see and feel and be inspired to stick with you through the roller coaster ride? And how can you stick with it whenever you create a new training program or opportunities for your beneficiaries, and then there's regulatory red tape or a government issue or government shutdown or some other obstacle that is completely out of your control? These types of questions, my friends, are best answered by someone who's been there. And our guest today has been there time and time again and has walked alongside others as they've made the leap from nothing to something. Our guest today is Steve Duddy, the founder of Duddy Executive Services. Steve is a transformation leading C-level executive known for taking unrecognized companies and product concepts to industry with gold standards and substantial financial performance at highly accelerated timeframes. With Fortune 500 experience with companies including 3M and Johnson & Johnson, Steve has managed organizations with P&Ls exceeding $250 million and navigated complex global supply chain and regulatory challenges to meet high-stakes company objectives. Steve is fiercely competitive, self-proclaimed, and he's strategic and tenacious with this uncanny ability to see opportunities where others don't, to set clear visions and to create actionable roadmaps to success. And he's able to do all this with compassion and fun. Essentially, Steve's the person behind the scenes who walks alongside leaders who are making the leap from entrepreneur to CEO and have a product or service that's ready for investors and need the mindset, capital, and organizational structure to attract the right people. He transforms the entrepreneur who started with little, more than a bright idea, into a CEO with the mindset, organizational structure, and financial capital to thrive at an entirely different level in business and life. He's here today sharing wisdom and insight on driving transformation, being resilient in the face of challenges, effectively communicating with your team, and so much more. Steve, thank you for being with us today.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Steve, I sure can. How are you doing?
I am great. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How's your morning so far?
The morning is great. I'm a morning person, so this to me is the best time of the day.
Yeah.
It feels like I kind of get a jump start on things. I've created some different rituals in the morning, like staying off of email until a certain time, because I used to get up and pick up the phone right away. And being able to have that morning coffee without the phone and the email, has made a change for me in
Yeah.
approaching the day. And so it's been great. And you, how has your morning been so far?
It's been fantastic. For a long time, I've had a quiet time. That's how I start my day. But
Hmm.
even just getting into the morning and focusing on my projects first versus checking email first
No,
it's
it's,
been a real difference.
I thought it was going to be far more difficult because I've always been attached to the phone.
Hmm.
But I have to tell you, it's been much easier than what I've realized. I think I've, for the longest time, held on to, well, my companies need me, my clients need me, and I have the phone set up so the kids, there are certain numbers, if they call through at night. But anyway, yeah, I thought it was going to be much more difficult, but it's turned out to be pleasantly,
Oh, that's so nice. That's huge, especially when you have built your whole career around it, and
yes,
you were in business when the cell phone was, just coming around. I remember it in the early '90s, and I don't
yes,
know how we became attached to them, but we sure did.
we did. And, the other thing is, I think I've always felt, business, when you do business globally, you have
Mhm,
time zones that you're dealing with.
mhm.
And so for the longest time, tried to make myself as available as I could be for all of those different time zones.
Yeah.
And still within reason will, but
Mhm.
make it really clear it's got to be an emergency and not day to day business because we can plan those discussions.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and
So
especially
true.
today, in a perfect timing when you look at what's going on in the world today
Hmm.
and running a company,
Hmm.
it is so different. I mean, we said this during COVID.
Hmm.
And I remember talking to an experienced CEO who said, I said to him, Dave, I've never seen anything like this. And he had been a CEO far longer than I. And he said, Steve, nobody has.
Hmm.
And it's true today with everything going on. And I
Yeah.
think that unfortunately, there are a lot of leaders out there who haven't experienced these kinds of things before
Hmm.
and are trying to wrap their arms around. So, what do I do?
Hmm.
And I think, having some guidance from real world, because you and I both see podcasts out there where investors get up and they talk about things or others get up and go, okay, but that's not real world, right?
Hmm.
What's the entrepreneur experiencing? What are they potentially missing?
Hmm.
How do you go about this? Because somebody's got to be in charge, but you have to be human too.
Yes.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, this day and age, with this, crisis, if you want to call it that, but people also understand that when you have employees, they have things going on at home that they're worried about, right? So you have
Hmm.
work, but they have their own personal worries,
Hmm.
whatever those happen to be. And it's so, okay, how do you help them feel good coming into work? Like at least this is their respite. This is a place where they're safe. This is a place where we're going to do the best we can together. You're not alone, and
Hmm.
then still get the most out of them. But you
Hmm.
have to do this with employees and you have to do this with investors and you have to do this with board members and you have to do this with vendors. It can be very complicated. And, I use the analogy of flying. And so when the weather is clear and the pilots are putting the plane down at the airport, it doesn't get a lot easier than that. But pilots really make their money and earn their money when they're having to put the plane down in bad weather or
Hmm.
visibility, an aircraft that's not functioning well. And so CEOs in some cases, like today's environment, are like those pilots trying to put the plane down in rough weather.
Hmm.
And so this is where they make their money and this is where they get a chance to shine.
Yes, it's so true. Coming from the wealth management space, that was my career for 20 years. No one needs you when the markets are good. It's when the
Right.
markets are
Right.
when the markets are volatile and there's so much uncertainty. That's when, obviously, I'm an advocate of having guidance. But when we're talking about general consumers and human behavior, no one
Hmm.
needs you when times are good, but they sure need you when times are crappy.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think, wouldn't you agree that your best investors, your best entrepreneurs didn't let a moment go by, good or bad, regarding the times they were always looking out through the
Yeah.
windshield instead of the rearview mirror?
Yes. So
And they
true.
want to know, can I be doing something different? Can I be doing something better? Can I be doing something nobody else is doing that will set me apart, make me more
Mhm.
money? Right. And didn't you experience that with some of your people as well?
Yes. The ones who, I don't want to say held the course, that's kind of an overused term, especially in the financial space, but the ones who just kept looking ahead and trusted the process and didn't get so distracted from the news and all the noise, and
Mhm.
just had this attitude of, okay, we're going to go through it. And those are
Right.
the ones that have the, I would say, when I think of what success looks like to me, that's
Mhm.
about really about having, freedom in my mind and my spirit, and
Mhm.
feeling like I'm not a captive to something or
Mhm.
someone. And
Mhm.
I think that those are the clients that just had that attitude of, okay, we're just going to go through it, were the ones that just had general more well-being
Right.
in life, regardless of
Right.
what their account balance was.
Right.
Yeah.
And I find, and I don't know if you find the same, but I find that there are a lot of behaviors that people have personally
Mm-hmm.
that carry over to work and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Yes.
if there is this uncertainty at home, if there is this turmoil, the family issues, they're going to experience them at work too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times, CEOs have said to me, well, I'm really surprised they left. It shouldn't be a surprise, right? If you're staying in touch with your most valuable asset, which is the team,
Mm-hmm.
you may know that there are other companies throwing more money. You may know that there are other opportunities, right? People don't leave because of money most of the time. They leave for opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
but you're supposed to be watching this or have other people watching it. And so staying in touch with that. But your investors are kind of the same way, right? Because your investors, you're one of many. And a lot of them, especially in today's world, haven't been through half of what you and I have been through either. And so they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out, they're accountable to somebody. And so they're trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I salvage this? I've got money wrapped up in this, and I've got 8 other ones like this that we're having to deal with. And so they're looking to you and saying, what are you doing? How are you going to
Mm-hmm.
do it? I got to go back and report back to this. So it really is complex, but it feels to me like the team, the investors, the market, they're looking for people that are going, I got this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be okay. It's not going to be without a few bumps and bruises, but we've got a far better plan and can roll with it than anybody else. And coming out of COVID, there were a couple exchanges where I've had an investor say to me, well, how'd you come up with that? And I said, I got a good team. I stayed in touch with some other people and picked their brain and decided to go somewhere where somebody hadn't gone before. And they're going, that's brilliant. Right. And it may not have been brilliant, but it was different. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where good leaders rise. Right.
Yeah.
And so you separate yourself from others because people can come to you and say, Trish is going to have, the silver bullet for me. Maybe that's a little overstating it, but I know if somebody's going to be able to do it, she's going to do it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the reputation you want.
Yeah. When you're working with new CEOs, or people who are CEOs in the making, how do
Hmm.
you guide them in? Because typically, when it comes to these times of uncertainty, the only way to have confidence getting through them is to have walked through them, and
Hmm.
the emotion has settled down, and the high energy of that emotion has really become wisdom. How do you
Hmm.
guide entrepreneurs, or as they're approaching the CEO stage and they haven't necessarily been through this, but yet they are the face of the company? How do you
Hmm.
give them encouragement so that they know that I got this?
And so I think what I start with is, how are you doing and how are you feeling? Right. Because that gives me some insight as to what's keeping them awake at night. And I may even ask them, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's more of, helps me understand what they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I may dig into it and say, okay, why? Let's talk through this.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time when you're done, there is a bit of a, okay, I get it. I think some of the really good leaders out there, they want to be solid. They want people to go, oh my God. And look, we're all human and we're all going to make mistakes and we all have emotion. But for me to try to understand where this individual is, what are they thinking about? Where their heads are at, will help me guide them through. Okay, let's talk about some ways we might be able to deal with this and see if any of this lands with you. But if
Mm-hmm.
I just plow through, most of the time, then I am putting on them what I think they may be experiencing or what I may be, but they're all different. And so I ask them, how are you feeling? What are you doing? Are you talking to the board members? And they may come out and say, oh, my board's putting pressure on me. Okay, let's talk about it. But let's figure out what the source is. Let's figure out where their heads are at. Because the other thing is, Trisha, if they're in a panic, they're not going to hear you, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
got whatever's going on in their head, and you want them to know that they've got a partner. right? That's what you're doing in our world is you're partnering with them. And you're saying, okay, you're not alone. I'm your wingman on this, but let's talk about it. This is an open, frank conversation so I can provide some suggestions to you. And so that's what I would start with is where's your head at?
There's a lot of wisdom in that for entrepreneurs in general when they're facing times of uncertainty is to have that pause and ask themselves, it just kind of taking that break and getting in touch with where they are. How am I thinking? How am I feeling? Obviously, talking to someone about it is the best thing, but starting with writing it out sounds like a great place to at least get yourself centered so that you can lead even in your family and lead among your friend group.
And it's that confidence, again, when you meet with the team, because that's the other thing I highly recommend during, these uncertain times, rather than having fragmented conversations going on. If you have a management team, get your management team together and ask them, where is everybody at? And so that will help you gauge as to whether your management team is being able to read the room right. And then you also want the management team to be able to come to you and saying, okay, I've got my concerns. Again, no matter the level, they're all going to have concerns. And so that gives the management team communication, and it gives the management team the feeling of, I'm not alone. I've got others within the company that are working through this with me. And I've got, in this case, Steve, that I can go to and we can talk about that. And then we get the teams together. I remember going through this with COVID and sitting down with them and organizing a presentation and calling it out and saying, this is what it is. Here's how we're going to plan. And we're going to call an audible. At least when they walk out, they feel like they've got an open door, right? At least they realize you're not burying your head in the sand and ignoring the situation, because to me, that's worse.
Yeah.
Right. Not acknowledging what's going on around us. I think is one of the worst things you can do as a leader, because it gives them the impression of either you don't care or you're living in a different world and they're not going to understand what's going on. You read the room again as you're talking about it, and you'll see expressions on people's faces. You can tell who's embracing this, who's not quite there and is distracted. But yeah, I think you're right. Whether you're writing it down, whether you're having verbal communication with the team, it could be through emails, or at least letting them know there is somebody at the helm that's got this. Let's just all do it together.
When you're working with a CEO or with a team, let's say the CEO, and there's someone on the team who, for lack of a better term, they're not going to make it. They've got either too much going on in their lives, or there's something in their mind that there's some sort of block and they're just not going to be able to make it to that next level, whether it's due to this uncertainty that's happening or whether it's due to a shift in the business, not anything that's necessarily global uncertainty, but something that's a trajectory shift in the business as they're going from one level to the next. How do you guide CEOs to either have those conversations or to help the person gently offload themselves?
Okay. And that has been one of the things that I struggled with the most in the past. So I'm kind of glad that you brought it up, because it felt like to me, I had a tendency sometimes to keep underperforming or poor fits longer than they should have. And I think, I've had a shift to okay, there's two things you need to do. As cold and as callous as it may seem, you have to make sure whatever their responsibility is being picked up somewhere, at least temporarily. Okay. And then you have what I call a coaching and counseling session where you call it out and just say, look, we're depending on you. And this is, a conversation I had with my group at one point where I just said, we're a group of rowers. I happen to be the coxswain. I'm calling the stroke on this. Everybody's got to row in unison. If we don't row in unison, we're not going to win the race. But if you don't want to row, you're going to have to get out of the boat. And we're going to have to put somebody else in that's willing to row. You have all of the policies and procedures you have to follow when it comes to an employee. But I first believe in trying to get to and depending on how drastic the fall off is, Tricia, there have been situations where people have had personal problems, and whether it is marital problems, whether it is substance abuse issues or whatever it might be, getting to the bottom of that, I think, is critical. Because again, in fairness to the employee and to the company, being able to look at that first. But if it's purely they're just not going to rise to the next level, then that's a conversation you have to have. And just say, this is what we're needing. This is what this role requires. and you're either going to have to step out and you put them on a performance, program, but you prep for the slack, pick up the slack and get the bullpen warming up because there's a good chance they're not going to make it. You'd like to see it, but it's a good chance they're not.
If someone senses that the person is not going to make it, is it highly likely that they're not going to make it?
I've seen some people turn around. There have been some people turning around. I think there's also an interesting discussion when somebody comes to me and says to me, hey, I've been offered another job, and we'll talk about it. And they'll say, yeah, and it's more money. I think all but one situation, I've never offered more money because when it comes to a more money offer, it's going to come back again. And so at that point in time, I pretty much write it off and just say, look, I'm not here to counter offer your employment unless, like I said, there was one individual where I think they had a fair point. But money is one of those conversations where I know if we're having it now, we're going to have it again. But there are some people that make the turnaround and go, wow, they just surprised me. We had a sit down, come into Jesus with it and said, okay, this is what has to happen. And some people are able to do it, and there are just some that are not. And it's what the hardest part is being fair to allow them to play out, but also put a reasonable timeline in place for that to happen. Because if you keep hoping and waiting and hoping and waiting, you're going to be 6 months of, poor productivity, and it could bring the rest of the team down depending on their attitude. Right. And so you've probably seen this too, where you're going, oh, it's bad karma here. And so this is more than performance. They're changing, the mentality in the office, and I can't have that either.
When we think about the resilience that it takes and the challenges that CEOs face, especially the turbulence, I kind of equate it to an airplane. There's always going to be turbulence when you're going from one level to the next. Have you ever worked with any CEOs who want to quit or are ready to quit or ready to cash in their chips?
Yeah, I've had many say this looked a lot more fun from a distance.
Yeah.
Right. And then I tried to understand. So what did you think it was going to be? Right. And if you think this is kind of like being in a relationship, Tricia, right? Because they're work. However you want to cut it, it's work. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have pressures. You're going to have politics. But it more comes down to, okay, so what did you expect it to be? And is this something that we can work through together? Or are you really saying to me, I don't want to do this? I've actually had more. I have one situation now where somebody's come to me and said, I have a CEO, they're an investor. I have a CEO who they're just not going to make it. We went into this thing thinking they were fired up. They had this great knowledge, good people person, but just are not pulling the skills together. And talking to the board member about, okay, so what do you do with that? But for the most part, I think unfortunately what happens is a lot of CEOs, rather than seeking help, they either throw up their hands and just go, I don't know what you want me to do with it, or they just keep their head down and plowing ahead business as usual. And somebody's got to come to them and say, this isn't working. You're not making money. You're burning too much cash. You're losing employees. Pick any of those. On occasion, I've had CEOs come to me and say, this is just a lot more work than what I was anticipating. People say to me, oh my God, this raising money is just dreadful. Yeah, yes, it is, right? You're going to have to do this for pretty much your entire career as a CEO, right? And so if you don't like raising money, this is going to be an issue. And that's one of the biggest things that I do see is just saying, I hate raising money and I don't want to be a CEO anymore because I just don't want to have to do that. And look, it's not for everybody. That would be the biggest issue I think I run into when people are saying, I just don't want to do this anymore. It's really the money raising part of it. Some of it's the people, but it's really the money raising and dealing with boards.
What is your advice for them around the mindset guidance that you give them around to break through raising money?
And so I try to tell them that everybody's experienced the same thing. And you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find the prince. And I try to set the expectations up front of saying, this is not going to be a quick process. And I have one company I'm working with now where I'm encouraging them and saying, the best time to raise money is when you don't need it, because there's less pressure on you and the price of the money is much better. The minute you need it and they sense blood in the water, the dynamics change. But if you go into this and say, here's what to expect, you're going to have to talk to 100 or more. right? You're going to hear a lot of no's. And remember, they're saying no to the product, not no to you. You may have deals that fall out. The deals are going to take 6 to 9 months. You're going to have a drop off in communication with investors in August because of summer months. It's going to dry up at the end of Thanksgiving, and it's not going to kick back off until JP Morgan. Right. And so I try to give them some things to expect. So at least they can walk out of there and go, okay. And so I've only talked to, I'm making this up, 10 people. There's no way you're going, unless you struck pay dirt or luck somewhere. And so I try to start with that and saying, this is just the world that we're living in, and raising money is tough, and everybody is vying for the same amount of money. And then I get into, okay, so where is the investor's mindset? Investors have hurdles that you're going to need to jump in order to clear, what they need to feel comfortable and confident. They're risk adverse these days. And so trying to give them this is what the process is going to be. You're going to be told no. You're going to come out of there and feeling like, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. We're never going to raise the money. Let me help you with investors. I have a company right now where I presented a list of potential investors, but I said to her, these are not all going to be good fits for you. And let me tell you why, right? Because there's no sense in sending them off to people where it's going to be a no. That's just not where they invest. And so I try to lend as much knowledge as I can, so at least they can gather that experience, if you will, within a conversation and going, okay, Steve told me this is what I should expect. Mm-hmm. They'll come back to me and go, yeah, you were right. And going, okay, so how do you feel? Right. And they'll tell me, I feel, okay, at least I know where they're at now. Right. And say, okay, we got another 90 more we have to do this with, or even get on the phone. There's been somewhere I'll get on the phone with them and say, look, I am happy to help represent you as your wingman, however you want to do it, on the call, because it is just, if they see it and look at I get this, and they're telling Steve the same thing they're telling me, they go, okay, and then let's see how Steve reacts to it when we're done. And Steve's like, okay, this was not going to be a good fit anyway, so let's go on, right? And so sometimes that will help them as well. I have one company I'm doing that with where I'm saying, okay, I'll get on with you. It's cool, let's do it. But yeah, I think trying to set expectations with them so they're not shell shocked when it's unfolding helps quite a bit, and lets them hopefully realize it's not you. For the most part, this is just part of raising money.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's like, I don't want to say it goes to their integrity, but it hits the heart. It's very personal. And so for you to be able to remove some of the mystery and make it more matter of fact, they're saying, if they're saying no to the product, not to you. And for people to know kind of what to expect, that you're going to have to talk to 100 before you get one, or whatever the ratio is. That's tremendous. Yeah.
And Tricia, look, I'm as competitive as anybody. And my wife will tell you, in certain arenas, you don't want to play Monopoly with them. You don't want to, and so there is that competitiveness in raising the money. And I don't like no's, but it is what it is. And so, and I remember talking to an entrepreneur after I had been through, I've had a few successes. I had one that unfortunately at the very end got pulled out from underneath us. And I remember that one really being a tough one for a lot of reasons. And when I spoke with this entrepreneur that I truly respected, that had been at this much longer than we were going through this, and he said, wow, out of all of these ventures, you've had only the one, that failed. And I said, yeah. And he says, and you call yourself an entrepreneur. And we started talking about it. And he said, I've had several. And he said, it doesn't really get easier because you hate to see this happen. But this again, and he was setting the stage for me and saying, this is what to expect. You're not going to have a home run, each time you go at this. And so it's still hard because I am competitive. I don't like losing, but it is the world we're playing in. And you probably have experienced this with others that you're coaching and bring them on board, and businesses that you've had that we'd like to think we got 100% success rate, but we just don't.
Yeah. Let's go up a little bit higher to the transformation level. You work especially with people, entrepreneurs who are in the medical device space. And Correct. I want to tie this in for our listeners, because most of our listeners are working in developing communities. They are drowning in need and never enough. Everyone around them needs so much, and they're dealing with so many systemic issues. And I really want the listeners to understand that when someone is listening to you and they think, oh, US medical devices, that doesn't apply to me. These things, when we're talking about transformation, this is a totally different thing. The reality is the dollars might be different, but the systemic issues are the same. So for people in the US medical device space, there's tons of bias, there's regulatory issues, there's this huge cycle. It takes forever for the process to be completed, for the technology to be developed. And so I really want listeners to understand that this question I'm going to ask you about transformation, it applies to them because the systemic issues they might be slightly different, but they are very much the same. So when you are working with, you've got a client who has a new device and they're looking to transform the industry, transform mindsets, transform lives with this new device. What are the qualities that you see in these people that really have the gumption to take this thing to the end and deal with the regulatory issues and deal with this long return on investment cycle and deal with all the manufacturing issues and challenges? What are the qualities that it really takes to drive transformation?
There's so many pieces to this, Tricia, which makes this fascinating. First of all, you start with the individual. What is it about the individual that leads me to believe that they are walking the walk, right? And so it's one thing to verbally say this, but it's another thing to put it into action. So what's their background? How did they arrive at this? How do they perceive things? And as we may or may not have talked about, I like to ask questions, and I'll tell people up front, I don't ask questions to draw judgment on decisions you've made before, to influence you on decisions you're going to make in the future, but I do it because I want to know. I want to collect data points. And so trying to get a feel for this individual and saying, okay, are they walking the walk and talking the talk? Are they thinking outside the box, right? And ask them, well, why do you think this? Why do you think this is going to be transformational? And you may play devil's advocate and just say, I'm going to tell you what I think you're going to be up against and tell me what you think. Do they have that? No, I understand this and we're going to get through this. Have I thought about, hey, this product is being made, in this case, in China. And so what is that going to do to costs? And have you given thought to relocating it somewhere else? Do you have a regulatory team that understands that this may be a breakthrough device, that this may be a longer path, that this may be an expensive path, but having them understand and go, yeah, I'm not worried about it. I know what it's going to be. It's that reality check of saying, okay, is it a pie in the sky, or does this person know with transformation comes risk? With transformation comes money and time. With transformation comes failure in some cases. And do they have the ability to turn the failure into the success? It's touching on all of those aspects of it. And you're right. I don't care whether it's a medical device or a food product or anything else. We all go through the same things. We all have the same issues to worry about. It is the people. It is the investors. It is the market and the consumer. It is where's the product coming from, right? And so all of those things are touched. And I try to understand if this person really is sitting in the world of reality where they're not putting their head in the sand and going, never going to happen. If they come to me and go, here's what I think the risks are. I say, okay, so if that happens, how are we getting around that? And many of the good ones will go, I've already got a plan B, and saying, okay, I think this is the real deal here. Those are the ones that are the most fun to work with, if you will. That they're saying, I know everybody's done this before this way, but I think we need to do it this way, and different is good. And being able to back it up with the plan and the resilience to I know I'm going to hit a no a couple times. I know I'm going to, in one of the companies, when I got brought in, I was told, let's go commercialize this thing. And we had to get through some final testing to commercialize it. And we had what I would consider a catastrophic failure. And they're calling me up and saying, Steve, we can't go to market. We've got a major issue here. And so you take a deep breath and go, okay, what are my options? Right. And so look, you got to deliver the bad news to investors, right? You've got to say, ladies and gentlemen, we've got this issue. But then you sit down with the team and say, okay, failure is not inevitable, but it's also not the final outcome here. What are we going to do about this? It's just not going to be a failure. So what do we do in reality? Can we say, and we did, we fixed it, but it's that, okay, we got this, we'll fix it, but being realistic about it, it's going to take some more time. It's going to be, more money, but good CEOs have this ability to look at it and go, yeah, I know, and I'm okay with that. And as long as they're real, I think they got a really good shot at being successful.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. Whenever you start working with new clients or they're coming to you, obviously, if they're coming to you, they know that whatever was serving them and what got them to one point is not going to get them to the next point. When they come to you and they're talking with you, what are some of the things that you look at and you say, oh, that quality, that trait, that mindset, we're going to need to upgrade that before we can, before we move on?
The biggest one, my pet peeve is, we've always done it that way. Right. And so if you're not succeeding and you respond with, we've always done it that way, that should raise a flag. If somebody gets super defensive about something, even when there's no reason to be defensive about it, they're protective of it, they're holding on to it, that's going to be a difficult one, because you have to try to bring them back down to earth and saying, okay, but let's talk about where that's got you so far. Right. And so if you keep doing that, I'm going to tell you, you're going to be in the same place. Or the harder conversation is, if you keep doing that and the results are the same, you may not be the CEO much longer. That's the world we're living in too. People forget CEOs report to boards. And so boards are going to want to see the CEO taking them down the path of success, not being stagnant. And so those are the hardest ones. Like, we've always done it that way, is the toughest one. And look at them and go, yeah, and right. But just say to them, okay, so let's wipe the slate clean on this. What do you do with it now? Right? This isn't working. And if they say, no, I'm still committed and I still think, and saying, okay, so what are you going to do differently? It's going to change it because you've been at this for 6 months. And so it's not my job to tell them what to do. It's my job to try to get that thought process going and lead them down that path. And on occasion, I'll have a board member call me and say, what do you think? Are they going to get there? And we have sometimes frank conversations. And sometimes it's also, Tricia, adding to the team, right? Because sometimes new CEOs don't necessarily know what they don't know, or they think they're expected to know it. And saying, okay, let's give them another team member that can strengthen the finance side, that's good at raising money. They've been through this before. Let's give them that. I have a company now where I'm saying, you need a good, solid director of R&D that can actually be the middleman on the project and will set the rest of the team up for more success. But yeah, it's that, we've always done it this way. That's the one that gets at me and going, yeah, but it's not working. So what do we do? Right.
You ride the roller coaster with a lot of people. And so you think of the ride of one CEO, one entrepreneur who's a CEO in the making, and they're on the journey, and you're on this ride with a lot of people at the same time. For you, from a personal level, what's your why? What keeps you going on the tough days?
So first of all, I have to say I'm spoiled. I love the companies I'm working with and the clients in particular. Being able to get on the phone with them, and I'm fortunate where they're global. They're not just US based. And knowing that we have the same concerns in the world makes us human together. But the knowledge, Tricia, I love being in a room with smart people. Many of the times I'm in the room with smart people. They may be smart in one area, but they're lacking, as we all are, in another. But most of them are smart. And so that jazzes me. And then, I may run into situations. I had coffee with somebody yesterday, and I truly respect her VC knowledge and world. And she's a friendly face in raising money. And I love being able to sit down with her and say, what do you think about these? Tell me what jumps out at you. And so it allows me to continue to get knowledge, to validate what I've seen in this. Is this the same thing they're seeing? But boy, oh boy, it's the people. And look, I'm a bit of a science guy. So I do love seeing some of these technologies. Some of them are absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, some of them, because of the way we raise money and the way VCs look at them, they may not be investable for them because it may not be a big enough ROI. But the benefit, there was one for glioblastoma I saw coming out of Berkeley and going, wow, if I had glioblastoma, the family member had somebody that had glioblastoma. This is an amazing breakthrough. Hard to fund. But wow, the technology is pretty amazing. I just love that aspect of it.
So before I ask my last question, how do people find you? How do people connect with you?
I have a website. It's www.duddyexecutiveservicesinc.com. You can shoot me an email at duddy.steven@gmail.com, and Steven with a VE. You can find me on LinkedIn. And, I've been fortunate. A lot of the people that have contacted me have come through other clients and companies I'm working with. But I am happy to talk with anybody about what they're experiencing, even if it's just to let them know, what you're going through is what everybody else is going through, if that makes them feel better. But shoot me an email, send me a LinkedIn message. Happy to connect. And if I can be of help, we'll do as much as I can.
Thank you for that, Steve. I'll put those in the show notes. And this is where most of our audience is on LinkedIn. So
okay, wonderful.
It's the wonderful gene pool for everybody.
It is.
So my last question, what is next on the horizon for you, my friend? What are you most excited about?
Wow. Personal or professional?
Let's start with personal.
I actually have a flying lesson on Friday.
Oh, wow.
I have always wanted to experience it. So I will be flying in a Cessna coming out of San Jose, California. And my understanding is after the classroom time, the flight will take me up over the Golden Gate Bridge and Alcatraz and San Francisco. And at some point I will get control. And so I'm so excited about that. That is just one of those things that's been on my bucket list, and I love flying. So that's going to be fun. From the professional side, boy, first of all, I appreciate the invitation and the hospitality, Tricia. Meeting somebody like yourself and continuing to be able to engage, with smart, personable people is part of why I do this. But being able to get on some boards where I can be of bigger help, to some of the companies, I'm looking forward to potentially presenting. I've been making a circuit on doing some presenting to VCs, either on behalf of companies or just in general. And so I love doing that and looking to do more of that as well. But just trying to help some of these new companies where they have brilliant ideas and some really smart, talented people, try to help them get over the hurdle and through some of this, if not from the business side, but personally help them get through this part. And so all those things I'm looking forward to.
Well, Steve, you have such a unique blend of gifts, and you have so much knowledge and wisdom, but you also have so much compassion, and you have a fun lightheartedness that it just is so easy to be around you. So your clients are truly blessed to have you in their lives.
Tricia.
And I am blessed, and our listeners are really fortunate to have learned from you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation and for having me here. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to hopefully chatting again with you.